Toxicity exists in all shapes and forms the way that we define it nowadays, and it can exist in any kind of industry, so long as interaction is needed. But gaming is infamous for having some of the most toxic communities out there, which only makes sense because with the rise of multiplayer gaming, there comes the greater number of points of conflict. However, toxicity shouldn't just be limited to player versus player, as a toxic environment can manifest in any kind of relationship. Player versus player is the most common, but there's another type of toxic environment that can arise that is almost as infamous, and that is the relationship between the consumer and the game developer, which is what I want to talk about today. It's no secret that game development is a difficult and stressful process that requires multiple skills in order to make a successful video game. So it's understandable when frustration arises when a consumer isn't as grateful towards a product that a game developer has produced. And sometimes the consumer might not give the most healthiest feedback possible, some of them doing it unintentionally and others maliciously. It's a very understandable frustration and one that we can all empathize with. However, from that comes a toxic mentality that is only regressive in its purpose. And it can be pretty much summed up as, your opinion about a game is worth little to nothing at all if you've never made a game before. And this isn't the only way that you can express this sentiment. There are many others, but I think that this is the most straightforward. It's honestly surprising how common this kind of sentiment is, and not just in the gaming sphere. This sentiment is also prevalent with many other types of media, such as movies and art. And this kind of sentiment is usually attached to an artist who has some sort of work that is controversial at best. But at the end of the day, it's still a toxic mentality to have. The main attribute being that it shuts down discussion rather than encouraging it. Whoever states such sentiment is shutting down any type of discussion coming from somebody who, at least in their eyes, is not qualified enough to judge their work. Now, many times this kind of mentality is used by those who knowingly use it in order to shut down discussion. And many times it's not done because of the ideology. Rather, it's done because it's supposed to be a blanket ad hominem, an attack to all of those who are negatively viewing a product, in an attempt to shut down what could possibly be legitimate criticism. And this video is not made for them. Those who continue to do so will continuously hurt their own reputation, as that pattern of trying to shut down negative comments can and will be used as fuel against them. What I hope to do with this video is convince the viewer that this kind of mentality is just toxic, period. So that if somebody ever finds themselves in that position, they can take into consideration the bad aspects of that mentality. One that on the surface might seem logical. After all, in order to properly deconstruct something, you need to know what you're working with. Obviously, the average player and the average critic might not be aware of what it takes to make a video game, such as the common practices of game design, UI and UX design, or some fundamental aspects like color theory and artistic direction. Obviously, it would be great if every single critic was aware of all the skill and effort that is required in order to create a game, as that could potentially increase the quality of such criticism. So it's understandable that most criticism just might not have the foundation in order to be good criticism. So it's completely understandable when an opinion is discarded because it is very apparent that the person who made that criticism had no idea what they're talking about. However, the toxicity starts when that sentiment is used as a blanket narrative to dispel much of the negative criticism. Not only is it wrong, it comes off as completely pretentious. It's almost as if saying, only other game developers are allowed to criticize my game because only they know what is wrong with it and no one else does. And it could be very well argued that somebody who does create games might have more useful information. However, there is one very important part that is missed when dispelling anybody who just doesn't have any game development experience behind them in order to back up their arguments. And that is the fact that game developers don't make games for other game developers. Game developers make games to be played by people that are not themselves. And these are the players, the gamers. And it could be very well argued that gamers are a lot better at criticism than game developers themselves, because more than likely gamers have had more experience with multiple different types of games from different developers, and thus have grown to know what exactly makes a good game. However, keep in mind that these opinions are not objective in any way whatsoever. It's a fact that people have different tastes and preferences, but they know exactly what makes a game fun for them, and this kind of information is invaluable. So not only is the toxic mentality that only other game developers who understand the game development process are worthy in handing out criticism is just downright unethical. It's also probably harmful to the quality of the criticism itself. As I said before, game developers don't make games for other game developers. They make it for gamers, especially in our economic system, where games have to be successful in order to turn a profit. And that means being well liked by people who have probably never made a game ever in their lives. So saying that their opinion is unworthy right out from the gate is wrong and is only going to hurt the developer themselves. It also makes it sound like if there was some sort of developer privilege out there, just because they made a game, and that just comes off as nothing but pretentious. Keep in mind that as time goes on, games are taking less and less skill to develop. In fact, with engines like Godot and Unreal Engine, you don't even need to know how to program in order to make a game. So having any kind of requirement in order to critique games makes absolutely no sense. It's a mentality that should be disencouraged, as it not only creates a toxic environment that widens the communication gap between player and developer, but can very well hurt the developer in the long run. Thank you for listening. If you found this video interesting, like it if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it. If you'd like to see more content just like this, make sure to subscribe. And if you'd like to support this channel, I do have a Patreon in the description. Thank you so much to all my fellow Patreons, and I will talk to you guys later.